Hello and welcome to MIP TV, and we're here in this episode of TA Made Simple, and this is where Bob Cook, TA therapist, explains in kind of straightforward language TA theory. And what we're looking at today is the stroke economy.
And strokes.
And strokes. Yes, we're looking at strokes primarily. So what are strokes, Bob?
Well, strokes in themselves, or this piece of theory is so essential to learn in terms of understanding transactional analysis. So a stroke is a unit of social action. And you've got positive strokes, you've got negative strokes. So when I say to you, Rory, I really like you, that is a positive transaction of recognition, if you like. And I mean, that could be verb, that could be non-verbal. So I could give you a hug if I could come across the screen and give you a hug.
Yeah.
And then you've got negative units of recognition, which of course would be things like, I don't like you, or, the whole, so the worst type of negative recognition, if you like, is if you ignore somebody. So I think that's the worst. And strokes are the basis of self-esteem, and of course, negative strokes leads to low self-esteem.
So just give us an example, Bob, of what a negative stroke would look like.
Oh, so many of them. So a verbal one
would
be something like, well, classically would be, I don't like you. Attitudes that go with that, of course, or the whole process of being sarcastic or putting people down or dismissing them, ignoring them, humiliating them, shaming them, all those types of verbal transactions. But often the most potent type of negative strokes are the non-verbal ones. So, for example, there's a wonderful book called The Evil Cradling by Keenan, and by Terry Waite, and the McCarthys. These are the people that were picked up in Lebanon.
John McCarthy, yes, yeah.
70s, and they were put in basically a hole and left to die. So without any recognition at all. And what happens when there's no recognition, or very limited recognition? You go crazy pretty quickly. But in terms of negative strokes, you start thinking badly of yourself, you start having low self-esteem, you start to humiliate yourself, you start to shame yourself. And as I said, non-verbal strokes, the actual abandoning of someone, or the, as I say, the cancelling out of somebody is just as negative as the actual explicit, if not worse. So, a young kid comes home and the parent ignores them. That's the worst type of negative strokes. So you come home from a hard day's work and your partner ignores you. That's worse, actually, than explicit negative recognition.
Yes.
Because at least you're alive if you're in that process of negative recognition.
Yes. And it's sometimes we see children acting out behaviours to gain recognition. So even bad behaviour can elicit a response. A negative response is better, as you say, than no response at all.
Absolutely. And stroke theories, of course, is really all about survival, psychological survival, as well as practical survival. We know, for example, that in the area of midwifery, quite often doctors put leopard skin into the actual the cots, or where the baby is actually put down, because it's the warmth of the actual leopard skin which sort of goes permeates the skin, and they feel better. So we all know this the self-esteem, psychological positivity is in the area of positive recognition.
Yes.
So you will feel warm all over when there's a positive stroke, when somebody recognizes you and says they like you, they care for you, they love you, or attitudes that pertain to that. And when people do the opposite, you feel bad.
Mm.
That's not nuclear science, but I think people forget it.
Yeah.
So the clients that I see, and you must see, usually have low self-esteem, and they tell themselves in their heads that they're not okay.
Mm.
So they give themselves negative strokes quite often,
Yes.
because that's what's been around in their culture.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you know, as a therapist, I think one of the most restrictive things that a therapist can do is praise the clients, you know, and you know, Rogers in the humanistic world talks about unconditional positive regard, prizing the clients and being with the client. And that is, again, that attention and you know, not being discounted in the world is just such a powerful set of conditions.
Yeah, and most clients that come in don't expect positive strokes.
No, no.
They actually, this is maybe hard to believe for a lot of people, but they expect to be negatively recognized or negatively strokes. So they expect the therapist to treat them with dismiss, disdain, and as if in some ways they're not valuable, because that's what they're used to, and that's what they tell themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. So if the therapist knows this piece of theory, how in TA does a therapist then use that knowledge in the service of the client?
Okay, so let's say we've got that piece of theory as a building block. The positive recognition builds up self-esteem, and negative recognition is the opposite. There's another important piece of stroke theory which is so vital that we need to know in all this. And the second bit is something called a stroke filter.
Oh.
So, for example, I used to go to Gambia a lot, which is in West Africa. I used to have a house up there for a while. And that is a very, very poor nation, as you know. And the people there are literally starving, really. And every third or fourth word would be around food. And it took me some time to get used to this poverty, by the way. But I remember going away after my first holiday there and saying to my wife, you know, next year I'm going to take them a chicken with plenty of, because it's Christmas time,
Yeah.
plenty of stuffing and sprouts and all the trimmings of a wonderful Christmas meal. I'm going to give them to this family to have, because they have never experienced anything like the Christmas meal. And my wife said, "Oh, Bob, haven't you forgotten something?" And I said, "What?" "That they won't be able to eat it." I said, "Why?" "Because their stomachs have shrunk." So take that metaphor and think about this. So if a client walks in and they've been a diet of crumbs, it will be too much for them to have a full meal. So what you need to do is understand that in the concept of what we call stroke filters. In other words, that the human organism will only allow in certain types of strokes that they're used to, and they will deflect out those they're not used to. So somebody who's been built upon a negative strokes will feel pretty odd if you suddenly give them a positive stroke. So what I intend to do, because I think it's the duty actually of therapists to attend to this, is I tend to sort of make an assessment about what's their level of stroke in terms of culture, and then I'll provide a sort of stroke cocktail. So I'll add in the odd positive recognition. So say a client sets themselves up and keeps coming late, for example. There's an example of negative processes. I might say something like, first, "Oh, you know, I wish you'd been here on time. So I'm recognized now coming." And then I will slip in the conversation, "And it's really nice to have seen you."
Yes.
So it's like a cocktail of what they are able to manage. Otherwise, they not only can't manage it, but they'll be overwhelmed, and they'll probably think that you are trying to trick them.
Yeah, yeah.
So you have to be able to have a sort of what I call a stroke cocktail process in the therapeutic alliance.
Yes, and that speaks of a couple of things for me really. Defense mechanisms,
Yeah.
honoring the client's defense mechanisms
Mm,
and not trying to bulldoze them over therapeutically and
mm,
replace them with unconditional positive regard in the humanistic world, or
mm.
I guess in the TA world, forcing the adult ego state upon them.
Yeah.
And it is about meeting the client. One of the things I used to say on the talk, you meet the client where they are.
Correct. Oh, that's right. And you have to do that. And if you meet them where they are, by judging the right types of stroking culture, you will build up a trusting working relationship and be able to, work out what types of strokes you will give to them in a conversation.
Yes.
Absolutely right. Now, a colleague of Eric Byrne, which I've mentioned before on many of these videos,
Yes.
called Claude Steiner,
Yes.
talked a lot about another type of concept. So far we've got strokes, now we've got stroke filter, and now we're going to stroke economy.
Yes.
And that's the idea that there's only a certain amount of strokes filtering around.
Yeah.
So, which has been programmed or fed to us. But it's not true. We can actually ask for strokes. We can actually come home and say to our partners or friends, I would like you to tell me that I'm lovable. I'd like you to tell me that you care for me. You can ask for strokes. You don't have to wait for them. There isn't a limited supply of them.
No.
And that's really important. I do a lot of groups, or I have done in my time. And I always I've always started off with the clients telling me good news.
Mm.
So we have this stroking culture built into this process, that they start off their group, if you like, with something good they've done for the week.
Mm.
So I build the idea, and I always build an idea into my clinical work that the members of the groups, for example, can ask other members of the groups for positive strokes,
Mm.
that they're not limited in this economy, that there's an abundance of strokes.
Yes, I think that's really interesting, isn't it? That you starting off certainly in training groups, the idea of positive links in so strongly, doesn't it, to positive psychology, and getting them into a place where the world isn't. People might have very difficult times, but there are rays of light in there, and if people can find those rays of light, may very well be that sets them up a little better in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. To be able to this piece of theory, to be able to think about stroking our clients positively is so wonderful, because you can think of it another way of this. Maybe a client walks in and they haven't had a stroke all week. Positive stroke. The only stroke they've had maybe is negative. So you are creating a revolution. In fact, I think. And Steiner again talks about positive strokes as warm fuzzies.
Yes.
So you feel wow. And he talks about, negative strokes as cold pricklies.
Yes.
We feel cold and bad. And what we need in our world is bags and bags of really wonderful warm pricklies, and throw out these horrible, horrible cold pricklies. We need lots of warm fuzzies. That's what he called these positive strokes. And get rid of these cold pricklies.
Yes.
And in the 1970s, Woolworths came out with some wonderful little creatures, which were called warm fuzzies. These and some horrible spiky things, which were the cold pricklies. And I remember buying them in another world time. But I bought some, and I used to give them to my clients, these wonderful warm fuzzies, and they would play with these, and so I'd build them into the whole concept of positive psychology and self-esteem.
Yes. It really strikes me that when you were talking about kind of, the world needing more, warm fuzzies. That there's a wonderful song called "What the World Needs Now" is make love, isn't there?
Yeah.
And it strikes me that there is such a room in therapy for love, for humanistic love, for recognition, for valuing your client. That type of love, so important, because you may very well be replacing or giving a kind of love and recognition that maybe they've not received in their past.
Yeah, I think it's fundamental. Stroke theory is fundamental to good psychological health. And you are really right about something the therapists need to think about, is that most people that I see and you will see, and many of the therapists that's in this will see, defend against them.
Ah,
To teach them, as you said, you have to really understand their culture to be able to slip in and help them transform their stroke patterns and work towards
yes.
psychological health. So strokes is a wonderful aspect of theory to think. And here we go again. To clients that come through my door, now you'll like this, Wally, you're going to really like this.
Okay.
I always offer them a cup of tea.
Yes, I do that. I do that. Yeah.
Whether they take the tea or not,
No.
this aspect, people might think this is courteous cultural scripting, whatever you like, but I think it's a way of recognizing positively the person that comes through the door. And we could have lots of discussions about infantilizing them and goodness knows what. But in terms of stroke theory, it's recognizing them.
It is, isn't it? And also, I think there's something about balancing power out. If you sat with a cup of tea with a client and they've got a cup of tea, there's something about equalizing power, which I think is just so underrated in the therapy world and not really talked about to a great extent. Well, certainly not that I've seen. It may very well be, but not that I've seen.
No, so stroke theory is a really important part of transaction analysis, and we teach this very early on in terms of theory, but we teach therapists how to recognize their clients, and when the clients defend against that recognition, just like you said, what you do about it.
Yes. Well, I mean, as always, I'm always fascinated with your teachings on TA theory, and I'm always aware just how much crossover there is into the humanistic world. We may here in Counselling Towers in the humanistic world, we don't in the person-centered world, we wouldn't use that terminology, but we would certainly use that behaviour towards clients in terms of positive regard and being expressive with them about what they've achieved. So again, it's always good to see there's such a crossover. The language may be different, but I think the intent is the same, Bob.
I think the intent is the same. And of course, transactional analysis is a humanistic psychology.
Of course.
So you're absolutely right. And I'm with you, really, in terms of the crossovers of many of these humanistic disciplines.
Yeah. Well, as always, Bob Cook, it's a pleasure to hear you talk about what is clearly a passion, and you're so knowledgeable about it. So there's a stroke in itself, and there's a stroke in itself. And in the next video, we're going to be looking at decontamination. So if you are watching, do stay tuned. It is a therapeutic term. We're not talking about anything to do with industrial cleansing.
No, it's a transaction analysis term.
We're not going to be turning up in industrial gloves and aprons. But yeah, so we talk about decontamination in the next video.
That's right, Rory.
So as always, Bob Cook, thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes.